I am typing this on my phone, sitting on the floor of my kitchen with my back pressed against the refrigerator. I have to keep the screen brightness turned down because my eyes are sensitive, and my head is pounding with a pressure I cannot fully describe. I need to explain everything that has happened over the last 3 weeks, from the very beginning, so that someone reading this might understand the specific mechanics of the trap I am currently sitting in. I need someone to tell me how to stop a person from walking into a building when I cannot use my voice to warn them. The sequence of events started a month ago when my relationship ended. The breakup was completely devastating, the kind of emotional collapse that leaves you physically exhausted and entirely incapable of functioning in your normal routine. We had lived together for 4 years in a bright, noisy apartment near the center of the city, surrounded by friends and constant activity. When the relationship dissolved, I had to pack my belongings into cardboard boxes over the course of a single, agonizing weekend. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to find a place where no one knew me, where the rent was cheap enough that I could afford it on my single income, and where the environment was completely silent. I craved absolute isolation to process the grief. I spent days scouring online listings, skipping past anything that looked modern or situated in a busy neighborhood. I eventually found a listing for a small one-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a very old brick building located on the quiet, industrial edge of the city. The rent was suspiciously low, well below the market average, but the photos showed a clean space with hardwood floors and high ceilings. I scheduled a viewing immediately. The building owner met me at the front entrance. He was an older, tired-looking man carrying a heavy ring of brass keys. He did not ask me any personal questions, and he seemed eager to get the lease signed as quickly as possible. As he led me up the narrow, dimly lit staircase to the 4th floor, I noticed the heavy smell of old dust and floor wax. The hallway was covered in a faded, patterned carpet that muffled our footsteps. There were only 2 doors at the very end of the long hallway on the 4th floor. My unit was the one on the left. The door on the right was shut tight, with a small, tarnished brass number plate fixed to the wood. I asked the building owner about the neighbors, specifically requesting assurance that the floor was quiet. I explained that I worked from home occasionally and was going through a difficult personal transition, making a peaceful environment my absolute top priority. The building owner waved his hand dismissively toward the door on the right. He assured me that the entire right side of the 4th floor was vacant. He claimed the previous tenant had moved out months ago, and the management company was holding off on renovating that specific unit until the following year due to budget constraints. He promised me that I would have the entire end of the hallway to myself, with no shared walls to worry about except the one dividing my bedroom and the supposedly empty apartment next door. I signed the lease on the spot, handed over the security deposit, and began moving my boxes in the very next morning. The first few days were entirely normal. I spent my time unpacking slowly, organizing my books, and trying to adjust to the heavy, lonely feeling of living completely by myself for the first time in years. The apartment was exactly what I had wanted. It was drafty and a bit dark, but it offered a level of solitude I desperately needed. By the beginning of the 2nd week, the physical exhaustion of the move started to wear off, and my senses became more attuned to the environment of the old building. That was when I began to notice the noises coming through the shared wall in my bedroom. The wall dividing my apartment from the empty unit next door runs the entire length of my bedroom and my kitchen. The drywall is covered in a layer of cheap, peeling paint, and the baseboards are slightly separated from the floor, revealing small gaps where the old wood has warped over the decades. I placed my bed directly against this shared wall, hoping the solid surface would ground the room. The noises started on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and struggling to fall asleep, when I heard a distinct, heavy footstep from the other side of the drywall. I held my breath and listened. The footstep was followed by another, and then another. It was the slow, rhythmic sound of someone pacing back and forth across a hardwood floor. The heavy, muffled thuds vibrated through the structure of the building, traveling directly through the plaster and into the frame of my bed. I lay there in the dark, annoyed but not overly concerned, assuming the building owner had simply lied to me about the vacancy or had moved a new tenant in without mentioning it. The pacing continued for 20 minutes before stopping abruptly. A few seconds later, I heard a wet, rattling cough echoing through the wall. It was a very distinct human sound, loud enough to confirm that the walls separating the units were terribly thin. I rolled over, pulled the pillow over my head, and eventually managed to fall asleep. The noises escalated over the next 3 days. The pacing became more frequent, occurring at odd hours of the morning and late into the afternoon. I started hearing other sounds filtering through the plaster. The sharp, sudden clatter of something hard being dropped onto the floorboards. The scraping noise of a heavy wooden chair being dragged across a room. The faint, muffled sound of cabinet doors being opened and shut. The constant intrusion into my quiet space began to severely agitate my already fragile emotional state. I had specifically chosen this unit for the isolation, and listening to a stranger go about their daily routine inches away from my head was driving me crazy. I decided to call the building owner on Friday afternoon to complain. I dialed his number, feeling a surge of righteous frustration as the phone rang. He answered with his usual tired, gruff tone. I immediately brought up the noise issue, explaining that the new tenant in the unit next door was being incredibly disruptive and asking if he could speak to them about keeping the noise level down, especially late at night. The building owner sounded genuinely confused. He paused for several seconds before responding. He swore to me, using very firm language, that the apartment next door was completely empty. He stated that he had the only key, the deadbolt was secured, and no one had been inside that unit for at least 6 months. I argued with him, detailing the specific sounds I had been hearing. The coughing, the pacing, the dropped objects. I insisted that someone was in there, possibly a squatter who had broken in. He sighed heavily into the receiver. He explained that old brick buildings are notorious for carrying acoustic vibrations in completely unpredictable ways. He told me that sound can travel down the ventilation shafts, vibrate through the massive iron radiator pipes, and bounce off the structural beams. He claimed that the footsteps and the coughing I was hearing were definitely originating from the tenants living on the 5th floor, directly above the empty unit, and that the hollow space of the vacant apartment was simply acting as an echo chamber, amplifying the sounds and projecting them through my bedroom wall. His explanation sounded plausible enough to make me doubt my own perception. I am not an architect, and I know that living in a massive, ancient structure comes with a certain level of environmental noise. I accepted his answer, apologized for the aggressive tone of my complaint, and hung up the phone. I decided that if the noise was just a permanent feature of the old plumbing and the hollow architecture, I would simply have to block it out. I walked down to the pharmacy on the corner of the street and purchased a large container of heavy-duty foam earplugs. I began wearing the earplugs every single night, and occasionally during the day when the phantom noises from the wall became too distracting. The foam cylinders worked perfectly, expanding in my ear canals to block out the scraping, the coughing, and the heavy footsteps. They created a localized, silent bubble around my head, allowing me to finally relax and sleep without interruption. I rationalized the entire situation as a minor inconvenience, a small price to pay for the cheap rent and the distance from my previous life. I maintained this routine for an entire week, living in my quiet, muffled bubble, entirely unaware of the catastrophic shift occurring in the physics of my apartment. The rationalization shattered completely 2 days ago. I woke up early on a Sunday morning. I removed the foam earplugs, tossed them onto the nightstand, and walked into the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. My mind was foggy, still lingering on a vivid dream about my ex-partner, and my movements were sluggish and uncoordinated. I opened the overhead cabinet to grab my favorite heavy ceramic mug. The mug was large, thick, and held a significant amount of weight. As I pulled it down from the high shelf, my fingers slipped against the smooth glaze. I watched the heavy ceramic mug fall toward the floor. It felt like it was moving in slow motion. I braced myself for the sharp, jarring explosion of sound that always accompanies breaking pottery on hard flooring. I squinted my eyes and tightened my shoulders, anticipating the loud crash. The mug hit the linoleum floor and shattered into dozens of jagged, uneven pieces. The ceramic fragments bounced and slid across the kitchen, scattering beneath the oven and the refrigerator. But there was absolutely no sound. Total, complete silence. I stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, staring down at the broken pieces surrounding my bare feet. My brain struggled to process the conflicting sensory information. I had clearly seen the violent physical impact. I had seen the mug break apart, but my ears had registered nothing. There was no crash, no sharp crack, no ringing echo. The event had occurred in a perfect, localized acoustic vacuum. A heavy, suffocating wave of confusion washed over me. I rubbed my ears aggressively, thinking that perhaps the foam earplugs had caused a temporary blockage or a sudden shift in my internal air pressure. I swallowed hard, trying to pop my eardrums. I continued to stare at the broken ceramic, my heart beginning to hammer rapidly, counting the seconds as I tried to force logic onto an impossible situation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I reached 10 seconds. At exactly the 10-second mark, the sound arrived. A loud, sharp, incredibly violent crash erupted through the apartment, echoing with terrifying clarity. But the sound did not come from the floor beneath my feet. The exact, precise audio recording of my heavy ceramic mug shattering against a hard surface came blasting through the shared wall from the empty apartment next door. I jumped backward, my bare heel stepping on a sharp piece of broken ceramic. I felt the sharp sting of the cut, but the pain was instantly overshadowed by the sheer impossibility of what I had just experienced. I backed away from the shared wall, retreating into the center of the living room. I needed to test the environment. I needed to prove to myself that I was experiencing a severe auditory hallucination brought on by extreme stress and isolation. I walked over to the bookshelf, grabbed a heavy, hardcover dictionary, and held it out at shoulder height. I looked at the floor, took a deep breath, and released the book. The heavy volume plummeted downward, landing flat on the hardwood floorboards. The visual impact was substantial, the pages fluttering open upon hitting the ground. Zero sound. I stood in the center of the living room, my eyes locked on the book, counting the seconds under my breath. The silence in the apartment felt different now. It felt heavy, predatory, and deeply unnatural. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. 10 seconds passed. A heavy, muffled thud, the exact sound of a large book hitting a hardwood floor, echoed directly through the wall from the apartment next door. A cold, visceral terror gripped my chest. This was not old plumbing. This was not the acoustic vibration of a brick building. I began frantically testing everything in the apartment, moving from room to room in a state of escalating panic. I grabbed a metal spoon and struck it against the kitchen counter. Silence. 10 seconds later, the sharp metallic ring echoed from the neighbor's kitchen. I slammed the heavy wooden bathroom door shut. Silence. 10 seconds later, the violent slam reverberated from the neighbor's bathroom. I spent the rest of Sunday sitting completely motionless on my living room couch, terrified to move, terrified to generate any noise that the wall could steal. As the hours passed, I noticed that the environment was growing progressively quieter, as if the localized vacuum was expanding its capacity. The faint, persistent hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen completely ceased to exist to my ears. The distant, muffled rumble of the traffic on the street outside the window faded into absolute nothingness. By nightfall, the only sound I could hear was the slow, steady rhythm of my own breathing and the frantic beating of my heart inside my chest. I refused to sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, feeling entirely trapped in an invisible, silent cage. Yesterday morning, I stood up from the couch to walk to the kitchen for a glass of water. My legs were stiff from sitting in the same position for hours, and my vision was blurry from exhaustion. As I rounded the corner of the hallway, I misjudged the distance and slammed my bare foot directly into the sharp wooden leg of a heavy antique console table. The pain was immediate, sharp, and blinding. It shot up my leg, causing my entire body to tense violently. The instinctual, extreme pain took over completely. I threw my head back, opened my mouth wide, and attempted to scream. I pushed the air aggressively from my lungs, straining my vocal cords to project a loud cry of agony. My mouth was wide open. My chest was heaving. My throat was tight. But my vocal cords produced absolutely nothing. The silence was terrifying. I was physically performing the action of screaming, pushing maximum effort into the vocalization, but the air leaving my mouth was entirely dead. I could not even hear the rush of my own breath passing over my teeth. I dropped to my knees, clutching my injured foot, my mind fracturing under the weight of the realization. I remained on the floor, counting the seconds, a new level of dread washing over me. 10 seconds later, a loud, agonizing, blood-curdling scream tore through the shared drywall from the empty apartment next door. It was my voice. It was the exact pitch, tone, and desperation of the scream I had just attempted to release from my own throat. The sound echoed through the plaster, raw and terrifying, bouncing around the hollow interior of the vacant unit before fading back into the heavy, oppressive silence. I scrambled backward on the floor, retreating as far away from the shared wall as the layout of my apartment would allow. I pressed my back against the front door, staring down the hallway toward the bedroom. I brought my trembling hands up to my face, opened my mouth, and tried to speak. I formed the words perfectly with my lips and tongue. I pushed the air from my diaphragm. I tried to say the word, help. Nothing. Total absolute silence. I waited 10 seconds. The word, help, whispered clearly through the drywall from the other side, spoken in my exact voice, dripping with the fear I was currently experiencing. I realized I needed to leave the apartment immediately. I needed to get out into the hallway, run down the stairs, and escape the building before this thing permanently erased my ability to communicate with the outside world. I grabbed the handle of my front door, twisted the deadbolt, and pulled it open. I stumbled out into the dim, carpeted hallway of the 4th floor. The moment I crossed the threshold and stepped into the communal space, the heavy silence broke slightly. I could faintly hear the hum of the old fluorescent light fixture mounted on the ceiling. The air pressure in my ears normalized marginally. I stood in the hallway looking at the heavy wooden door of the supposedly empty apartment on the right. A mixture of sheer terror and desperate anger consumed me. I needed to know what was inside that unit. I needed to know what was hoarding my sounds, collecting my voice, and playing it back through the walls. I walked the few short steps to the neighbor's door. The tarnished brass number plate caught the dim light. I raised my fist and slammed it against the heavy wood as hard as I could, knocking frantically, demanding a response from whatever was hiding in the dark, hollow space. My knuckles struck the wood repeatedly. The impacts produced no sound in the hallway. The acoustic theft was bleeding out into the corridor immediately surrounding the doorframe. I stopped knocking and stood there, my fist hovering in the air, waiting for the inevitable 10-second delay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The loud, frantic, aggressive pounding echoed from the inside of the door. The sound was heavily muffled by the thick wood, but the rhythm was exactly what my fist had produced. I stepped back, preparing to turn and run toward the staircase. Before I could move, the heavy deadbolt on the neighbor's door clicked loudly. The sound was sharp and immediate. There was no delay. A voice spoke from the other side of the heavy wood. The voice was clear, calm, and perfectly audible through the barrier. "Who is there?" the voice asked. I froze, all the blood draining from my face, my stomach dropping into a bottomless pit of cold dread. The voice answering from behind the locked door was my own voice. It was the exact pitch, the exact cadence, the exact vocal fry I use when I ask a question. It was a perfect, flawless replica of my speech patterns. I opened my mouth to respond, to demand answers, to scream, but there was no sound to give. The silence stretched in the hallway. The voice behind the door spoke again. "You better go back to your apartment. You don't want to know what will happen to you if you go down those stairs," my stolen voice said, the words sliding through the wood with terrifying clarity. "I will see you when you are ripe." I did not wait another second. I turned and sprinted back into my own apartment, slamming my front door shut and locking the deadbolt, sliding the security chain into place with shaking hands. I ran to the kitchen counter and grabbed my cell phone. I needed to contact the building owner. I needed to tell him that his empty apartment was housing a terrifying thing, that the walls were a trap, and that I needed immediate extraction from the 4th floor. I found his number in my contacts and hit the call button. I held the phone tight against my ear, listening to the dial tone ring. The building owner answered on the 4th ring, his voice gruff and annoyed by the interruption. "Yeah, what is it?" he asked. I opened my mouth and screamed into the receiver. I yelled for help. I demanded he call the police. I begged him to come upstairs with his keys and open the door on the right. I poured every ounce of breath in my lungs into the phone speaker. "Hello?" the building owner said, his voice confused. "Is anyone there?" I continued to scream, tears streaming down my face, my throat aching from the physical exertion of the silent vocalization. "Look, I don't have time for prank calls," the building owner muttered. "If this is about the noise again, I told you, it's the plumbing." The line clicked dead. He hung up on me. I pulled the phone away from my face, staring at the darkened screen, the horrifying reality of my situation finally solidifying in my mind. I was completely isolated. I could dial emergency services. I could call the police, but I was trapped in a soundless box, entirely cut off from the hearing world. I slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets, pulling my knees to my chest, overwhelmed by the absolute silence pressing against my eardrums. I was trapped. If I stayed in the apartment, I was waiting to become ripe for whatever was developing behind the drywall. If I tried to run down the hallway, I risked encountering the thing if it decided to unlock that heavy wooden door. I needed to know where it was. I needed to track its movements within the empty unit so I could plan an escape when it was furthest from the corridor. I crawled across the linoleum floor, moving slowly and silently until I reached the shared wall dividing my kitchen from the neighbor's layout. I pressed my ear completely flat against the cold, peeling paint of the drywall, holding my breath, straining to pick up any auditory clues traveling through the plaster. I heard a voice. It was my voice speaking clearly, urgently from the other side of the barrier. The thing was having a conversation. It was projecting the stolen sound of my voice into the empty room, carrying on a distinct, focused dialogue. I pressed my ear harder against the wall, closing my eyes, focusing all my remaining sensory power on the muffled words leaking through the old construction. I know it's late," my stolen voice pleaded, the tone dripping with the exact mixture of desperation and vulnerability I used to use during our worst arguments. "I'm so sorry to call you right now, I had a complete panic attack. I'm not doing well. The new place is terrible." My blood ran completely cold. "Please," my stolen voice continued, breaking slightly, mimicking the sound of my tears with horrifying accuracy. "I know we said we wouldn't see each other for a while, but I really need you. I'm scared. I think someone is trying to break into my apartment. I can hear them outside the door." It was talking to my ex-partner. "I'm hiding in the bedroom," my stolen voice lied. "I can't come to the door. Please, just come over. The building owner left the main entrance unlocked. Come up to the 4th floor. My door is the one on the right at the end of the hall. The lock is broken. Just push it open and come inside. Please hurry, I need you to unlock the door and come inside." I scrambled across the floor, grabbed my phone, and frantically opened my messaging application. I needed to text my ex-partner. I needed to type a warning, to tell them to ignore the phone call, to explain that the voice on the line was a mimic. I opened the text thread. The last message sent was weeks ago, a painful, final goodbye. I started typing wildly, hitting the keys with shaking thumbs. "Do not come here. The call is fake. It is not me. Do not go to the 4th floor." I hit send. The small delivered text appeared beneath the blue bubble almost instantly, but a cold, heavy realization immediately washed over me. I know my ex-partner. When she panics, when she thinks someone she cares about is in immediate physical danger, she drops everything and rushes out the door. She will be driving recklessly across the city right now. She will not be checking her phone and won't see the warning text until she is already standing in the hallway, pushing open that heavy wooden door. I am sitting on the kitchen floor, watching the digital clock on my stove count down the minutes. She lives exactly 20 minutes away. I am paralyzed by an impossible choice, and the panic is making it difficult to breathe. If I stay hidden inside my locked apartment, I will have to sit here in total silence and listen through the drywall as she walks directly into the dark, hollow trap. I cannot call out to warn her when she reaches the 4th floor, because my throat cannot produce a single sound. My only other option is to unlock my front door, run down the stairs, and try to intercept her on the street before they enter the building. But to do that, I have to step out into the hallway. I have to walk right past the neighbor's door. And as the seconds tick by, a new, paralyzing dread is creeping into my mind. What if this is exactly what the thing wants? What if it doesn't want my ex-partner at all? What if it simply used my stolen voice, my specific memories, and my lingering grief to create the perfect bait? It might be using her just to force me to unlock my deadbolt and step out of my safe room into the corridor. That is why I am typing this desperate post. Please, if anyone reading this understands the rules of this kind of thing, tell me what to do. Should I risk the hallway, or am I just walking into my own execution? How do I stop someone from opening a door when my own voice is begging them to enter? The heavy pacing just started again on the other side of the wall. It is moving toward the door on the right. It is getting ready to welcome its guest, or it is waiting for me to step outside. I am out of time.